Hi there and welcome to the channel of A Disappointed Man with me, Jason Kennedy, the Disappointed Man. And for everyone celebrating today, I'd just like to say 中秋节快乐. Now, when I did the book snob tag, my previous video, there was a prompt I could not come up with a decent response to. It went like this: is there any genre you feel is looked down upon or snubbed? And I was trying to think about at the university, which is where I am right now, is there any particular genre? And I said no. How wrong I was. On deeper reflection, I did come up with an answer. Travel writing. Yes, I don't know why travel writing is so marginalized in the university, and yet there are absolutely no classes about it. So in this video, I thought I would stop looking at novels and I would pick up on a great piece of travel writing. So I'm going to talk about this classic, 1969's Laurie Lee, As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning. Okay, let's begin. Laurie Lee was born in 1914 in Stroud, Gloucestershire, England, and at the age of 3 his family relocated to the nearby village of Slade, and his childhood there is described in his 1959 book, Cider with Rosie, also a very successful movie. As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning joins him at the age of 19 as he is about to follow in the footsteps of his elder brothers, leaving the family home and going out into the wider world to seek his fortune. He firstly heads for the coast because he's never seen the sea, and he satisfies this ambition at Southampton. He gradually works his way inland until he arrives in London, where he remains for 1 year. During this time he works on a building site, and when this project is completed, he decides to head for Spain. He takes a boat to Vigo and then slowly walks across Spain, takes another boat to Malaga, and finally arrives in Andalusia. And the book ends at the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War. A rather simple plan for a book. So what makes As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning quite so special? Well, there isn't just one reason. There are several. The first is an air of romance that surrounds the figure of Laurie Lee himself, and this early passage where he's trying busking for the first time on his fiddle is just wonderful. Let me read it to you. I felt tense and shaky. It was the first time after all. I drew the violin from my coat like a gun. It was here in Southampton, with trains rattling overhead, that I was about to declare myself. One moment I was part of the hurrying crowds. The next I stood nakedly apart, my back to the wall, my hat on the pavement before me, the violin under my chin. The first notes I played were loud and raw, like a hoarse declaration of protest. Then they settled down and began to run more smoothly, and to stay more or less in tune. To my surprise, I was neither arrested nor told to shut up. Indeed, nobody took any notice at all. Then an old man, without stopping, surreptitiously tossed a penny into my hat, as though getting rid of some guilty evidence. That's a wonderful passage, but honestly, you can open this book on any page and find something highly quotable. It's one of the best written books I've ever read, and another reason I rate this so highly is for the thumbnail sketches of characters. I'll just give you one example. This is Arnold, who's the owner of a cafe, and the description of him goes like this. Arnold, the proprietor, who was also my landlord, was a man in his early 30s, a rounded dandy with heavy cream-white jowls and delicate parboiled hands. He did all the work alone, both the cooking and serving, and moved with the rolling dignity of a eunuch, dressed in tight cotton gowns, buttoned up to the throat, which also gave him the appearance of one of his cloth-wrapped pies. He was bold, large-headed, red-lipped and corseted, and was given to abstractions, silence and reveries, and he seemed clearly to be a cut above his clients, though if he thought so, he never showed it. Each day before breakfast, he padded around the tables, laying out the morning newspapers like hymn sheets, and these again were scrupulously changed in the evening. The customers also had the benefit of his soft-voiced summaries. I've never known a man who gave to this particular job such a sense of modest, almost priest-like dedication, advising and serving the labourers at his table and taking their coppers like a church collection. Wow, that's an amazing piece of writing, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, there's one final reason I'll give here for why I love this book so much, and that is for its unstinting honesty. And there's one really interesting passage concerning his second morning in Spain, and I want to use this as the springboard for returning to my original point regarding travel writing being rather neglected in the academy, because there is one particular piece of travel writing which is not neglected, which has been the subject of so much criticism, and that is Byron and his Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, which of course also concerns a journey across Spain and to other countries too. So let me just read you the Laurie Lee, and then you'll see how this relates to Byron. Okay, it goes like this. I lay on my belly, the warm earth against me, and forgot the cold dew and the wolves of the night. I felt it was for this I had come, to wake at dawn on a hillside and look out on a world for which I had no words, to start at the beginning, speechless and without plan, in a place that still had no memories for me. For as I woke that second morning, with the whole of Spain to walk through, I was in a country of which I knew nothing. The names of Velázquez, Goya, El Greco, Lope de Vega, Juan de la Cruz were unknown to me. I'd never heard of the Cordovan Moors or the Catholic kings, nor of the Alhambra or the Escorial, or that Trafalgar was a Spanish cape, Gibraltar a Spanish rock, or that it was from here that Columbus had sailed for America. My small country school, always generous with its information as to the exports of Queensland and the fate of Jenkins' ear, had provided me with nothing more tangible or useful about Spain than that Seville had a barber and Barcelona nuts. What I find so interesting here is the stunning contrast between the education Laurie Lee had received in the 20s and 30s and that of Byron a century earlier, because of course Byron had a classical education and Europe for him was far from being a blank page. He was intimately acquainted with the history and culture of Europe before he set off on his travels, and his readers likewise had similar educations and would be able to grasp the many allusions contained to classical culture in his poem. So, if the kind of classical knowledge Byron possessed was inaccessible to Laurie Lee, how did he go about writing his book? Did he pioneer a new literary form? Of course not. And just as Byron went back to the 16th century to Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen for the verse form that he used in Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, Laurie Lee also goes back to the 16th century because he uses the Picaresque, which was originally the rogue story. Now, there is a Penguin Classics called Two Spanish Picaresque Novels. I will link to it in the description below. It's a must-have, but the rogue story later developed when the heroes would cross the ocean into the adventure story. And there is evidence inside the text of As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning of this progression. Let me just read you this part from the section in London. Laurie Lee's talking here about the other men who work on the building site with him. At least half of us certainly had been recruited from the underworld, apparently a normal practice of the times. We had old lags and conmen, temporarily defeated by crime, skilled cracksmen lying low between jobs, and others who had confessed under pressure to a wish to reform and seemed to be required to push barrows to prove it. I found myself working with men straight from the moor with its gangrenous pallor still on them, and who moved with that head-down shuffle, passive and blind, as though their world was still a walled-in circle. Most of them were natives of Wandsworth and Fulham, reticent but nostalgic men, who would sometimes loosen up with tales of crime and punishment, as though ruminating about the war. If you followed my argument this far, you may be able to formulate the conclusion for yourself. I'm not saying As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning should replace the study of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, but it does form a very useful contrast to it. And I would also suggest that many undergraduate and graduate students arriving at university are far closer to Laurie Lee in terms of the state of their knowledge than they are to Byron. And so it would make sense to include material such as this. There you have it. I think I've said enough, but before I depart, I must repeat my mantra. Be safe, be strong, and until the next time, nanu nanu.